Welcome back to Maria, amigos. I am your host, Maria Cardona. We're going to welcome to the show Chuck Rocha. He's one of the best political operatives in the country, and he made history and broke a lot of new ground during the Democratic primaries working for Bernie Sanders. I'd love to have Chuck tell us all how he did what he did and why he thinks it's so important to have Latino representation at the highest levels of presidential campaigns. Chuck, welcome to Maria.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here. It's a super exciting time. We're all going through this craziness that's happening in our country right now with people stuck at the house. And, I'm thinking about all the folks who are out there in the streets right now, and I want to lift them up. But thank you for recognizing the work that not just me, but I'm proud to say that over 206 different Latinos on the Bernie Sanders primary election, the work that they did. I think that's a big difference in representation in politics. Bernie Sanders hired more Latinos to work for him than ever in the history of any primary election in the history of our politics. And guess what that resulted in? Winning more states and getting more participation by Latinos than had ever been done before. So it's not rocket science. What we wanted to do, and what I've been telling people since I've worked for Ann Richards back in the late 90s in Texas, is if you invest in our community and you treat a Latino voter like a white suburban woman voter that everybody talks about in the collar counties of Philadelphia or Chicago, they will perform in the same way. I hate when people say Latinos don't vote. Well, Latinos do underperform a lot of times in voting, but that's because we don't ever give any money or any attention to the electorate. So what I did is I was lucky enough to be a senior advisor for the entire campaign. So I got to run all the different actions or all the other functions in the campaign. So I had budgetary authority. So I made sure I was in charge of the hiring. I was in charge of the operations in the states, that we hired Latinos in positions of power at every single level of the campaign. And then that would reiterate all through the structures to where we had really good cultural competency in all of the communications that we were putting out. And the last piece, and the most important piece, was we only had Latino consultants or Latino staffers making the product. And we started 6, 7, and sometimes 8 months in advance of the election, which had never been done before.
So, Chuck, of the 206 Latinos that work for Sanders, how many have gone over to work for the Biden campaign?
0.
That's really telling, isn't it? Why wouldn't someone take these trained resources and include them into their campaign for the good of the country, for the good of for the good of the party, for the good of the nation, in order to be able to have the best messaging out there? You were the most successful strategist ever in a presidential campaign from the Latino community. And you are beyond just being referred to as a Latino strategist. You are a Democratic strategist in totality. And I think that that's the recognition that we get marginalized in this world. And we're marginalized by our own party.
Well, I will push back a little bit and say that we've dealt with the coronavirus. There was a slowdown, but there's really no excuse for not hiring a portion of the people that we had trained because they just performed so well. And we went out because I was again in charge of the hiring and got community leaders from our movement, Felix, like me and you and Maria show up at lots of the same events. We go to the communities, we see lots of activists who are coming up. Us three, I've seen us all do it. We're always looking for that next generation of folks who can take our places, right? And so that's the mentality I took into this campaign. And all the campaigns should be doing that and thinking about it in that way. Anybody, Joe Biden or any senator who's running for Senate in Arizona or in North Carolina, cannot win without the Latino vote. The problem is you have such a small little executive group of people who make the real decisions when all of the big money begins to move, where Latino operatives and Black operatives and Asian operatives and gay operatives, they're left out. Not because they're not any good, it's because they haven't been in that club of that small elite group of people who've always done it. These folks have always run campaigns. Sometimes they failed up, and many, many times they've been given a job that they could grow into, but you never see that really happen in our community or in the Black community where they're like, oh, he may not or she may not be quite ready, but let's give her or him a shot. That happens a lot more with college educated elite folks and maybe the Harvard Institute groups or Yale's or folks like that, where our people just hadn't gotten there yet. And we're such a younger demographic, it just kind of adds on top of each other.
Chuck, you mentioned a couple of things that I think really are things that we should underscore. The first one was that at the Bernie Sanders campaign, you had budgetary authority. We all know that the people who control the money are the ones who have the real power. So I think that was one of the critical issues that let you succeed on the Bernie campaign. So kudos to you for having that and for using that. The second one that I've heard you say publicly is that you did something as simple as ask Latinos for their vote when nobody else had. Talk to us a little bit about that.
So thank you. You're right. Exactly. The targeting is a key part of this. And there's two factors that weigh into my 31 years of doing this. For 31 years, I've been somebody who was in the room. And Maria, you have too, if you think about it. Every time when we get down to the last few weeks, budgets get tight and things have to be cut. You have to strategically narrow down your targets to make your budget fit into what we're doing. Well, normally, Maria, what's the first thing or the second thing that's normally cut? It's the Latino outreach budget, or it's the Black budget, or it's something that's not those targeted Trump Obama voters, right? So I could throw my wings out wide and I could protect that because I had the authority, right? That's first. But B is the wrong way that we do campaigns, especially with people of color. What's happened in American politics is we've micromanaged down to a modeling target group of just a small group of people who always vote. In Nevada, for instance, we widened that out. There's 108,000 Latinos that have come of age and registered to vote in Nevada alone since Donald Trump was president. There's only 19,000 Latinos who have ever even caucused in Nevada ever. There's another 50,000 who have voted in a general election. I took all of those Latinos, put them in a targeted universe, and I talked to them for 6 months. Not for 2 months and not for 2 weeks. So you've got to open up your targets and talk to Latinos because we're younger. Because we're a younger demographic, we're more of an infrequent voter like all young people are. So it takes more of a resource to get in and talk to them. And you're not going to talk to them by running a Univision ad in Spanish. You have to talk to them on their cell phones and with digital targeting because that's where they live. My son is 29 years old. He don't even own a TV. I don't understand that, but most of us don't understand our 29-year-olds. I just know he's consuming information differently than I am.
You know, you said something earlier that I think is so incredibly important, especially for this viewing audience, because I'm sure they have heard so many times that Latinos don't vote. But guess what you proved? They do vote if you actually talk to them about the issues that matter to them. That's what this show is all about. So I'm so glad that you emphasize that. And I want you to talk to us a little bit more about that piece.
So getting them out to vote was the key part of it, but starting that conversation early. And what happens in other campaigns, and I keep saying that not to demagogue other consultants or other campaigns, but you got to know how historic this was. And it wasn't because of me, but the team that we built.
Absolutely, Chuck.
Right? I put Latinos in positions of power in the state. There was no Latino department at Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign. There was no Latino department in any state. There was no Latino outreach program. We made it part of the overall program, which made it very, very important that it never got siloed off. It got communicated with at every single level. So we knew there was a lens of cultural competency when these Brown consultants or these Brown staff were making that mail piece or making that newspaper ad. But it was more than just running the ads and running TV because that's all most campaigns would do. I remember talking to a reporter and they're like, has the other campaign started Latino outreach? And I was like, not really. We don't see them in the neighborhoods, but just watch 2 weeks before the election, they'll blow into town. They'll put up a badly translated Spanish ad on Univision and they'll have checked the box of their Latino program. And I'll tell you, that's exactly what happened. But we had been in those communities. Let's take Las Vegas again and Nevada. We put up our first office 9 months before the caucus, and we put it, and you know this, Maria, in East Las Vegas, in the heart of the Latino community, just down the road from the Cardenas Market. We were in those communities, knocking on those doors. So they see it in their newspaper, they see it on their telephones, they see it on their radio stations, and then you have somebody knocking on your door, validating it, showing up at the swap meets and the flea markets with Spanish language communications, wrote by Spanish people, delivered by Spanish speaking folks. So all of that layered together when reporters would call me 2 weeks before the election and go, Bernie Sanders is the only person we hear as we walk through the neighborhoods and talk to people. I was like, yes, it worked. But I was still nervous. Would they show up? I knew they were supporting us and I spent millions of dollars to get there, but would they show up? And they did show up. You know, in the early vote, like 42% were people who had never participated before in the caucus that were all Latinos, right? You sprinkle that in with the hatred out there for Donald Trump and this bias that they feel in America right now about being demagogue because they are brown. It's the perfect storm to see something special in November, to Felix's point, if Joe Biden does this right.
Thank you, Chuck. We have a lot more to talk to you about, so you stay with us. And our audience, you stay with us too. Ya regresamos. This is Maria. Welcome back to Maria, amigos. We're here again with Chuck Rocha and Felix Sanchez. Felix, I know you had a question for Chuck.
Yeah, Chuck, a moment ago you were talking about immigration was not the most important issue for Latinos, but it was a very emotional, empathetic issue that Latinos feel strongly about. How is it that the messaging that constantly goes out to U.S. Latinos is about a non-voter issue? How do we address the fact that the Latinos are still concerned about economic issues, about paying for college, about getting a mortgage, simply a longevity for a livelihood that they might have? How do we connect those important day-to-day issues that Latinos have with messaging?
I think the first part is what we talked about earlier is actually making the ask to people who normally don't get talked to. It starts there. There's just a small group of people, and they're normally older. They're normally Mexican. They're normally only live in a couple of states that actually ever get talked to about a presidential campaign and rarely by a Senate race. So it starts with broadening your target to have a conversation. And a conversation with a Latino voter is it's nuanced because we're so different. And everybody watching this program understands that, right? That the Cuban, the Puerto Rican, and even within Mexicans, I'm sitting here and I sound like an old white man with a cowboy hat on. It's much different than my La Raza brothers in East LA, right? We're both Mexican on the voter file, but we are way, way different in the way that we consume information or we think about it. Understanding this and segmenting out the Latinos and having that conversation, Felix, to your point, is a big part of it. And here, some news flash for everybody at home who's not in the bowels of watching all the things work in politics. That's how they do it with white voters every single day. They segment out people. They go and have a conversation. They talk to them about their candidate. They talk to them about the issues that matters to them. Felix, there's a lot of young people who've grown up with these dreamers. With the immigration issue is not the top issue, but it's very, very relevant for them and an emotional issue because they've seen their friends who are just like them. They just don't have documents. So it's something that can move them maybe to go vote for your friend. So we use that. There's been over 200,000 Puerto Ricans moved to Pennsylvania who are really mad at their government. They're really mad at Donald Trump. But will a presidential campaign or a Senate campaign really spend time and the money to go talk to Puerto Ricans who've moved to Scranton and Bethlehem and Allentown about an issue that's really personal to them, which is their island and a family that they were almost forced to leave because of a hurricane? These are the little nuanced segments of the Latino population that nobody ever takes the time to actually get to know or to more or less talk to them about issues that really matter to them.
Chuck, what about the actual Latino identity as perceived by young people? I mean, don't aren't they sort of affiliating themselves less with being Latino? I mean, they're more apt to not want labels on them. At the same time, they have issues that are in common with others their age. So, how do you deal with the changing sense of identity in young Latinos?
Young Latinos act like a lot of young Americans because they've grown up to be American. They're proud of their culture, but they just don't act as Latino or defined as Latino. That's not a plus or a negative as an older generation, but they're way more liberal. But you're right, because the Democratic Party has never went and talked to them really, they don't consider themselves a Democrat like their mother or their grandmother. We found this out in California when these non-party specific voters, they call them NPP voters, were dramatically Latino and dramatically younger. So all these young Latinos in California who had come of age and registered to vote were all registering as no party preference. So we had to go talk to them about Bernie Sanders, about the issues that resonated with them. But we took the time to have the conversation to understand what was relevant to them and ran a whole multi-million-dollar program just focused on those young Latinos who didn't feel like they were Democrat or Republican, who acted like a lot of other young adults in their neighborhood, Felix. So it's going there and having that conversation, but it drives back to your original question around the issue set. They really loved hearing about how colleges should be free if it's a junior college or a community college. They liked it that Bernie was for a $15 minimum wage, right? They are way more environmentally conscious than me or my grandparents were at that same time. So they kind of get it. I think it's an opportunity to do more, but we have to invest and draw a connection between the party to them, or they could be gone forever.
Chuck, another issue that I think is important for people to understand, and frankly, for political operatives to understand about our community, is that it's not enough to talk about how anti immigrant, how xenophobic, how bigoted Trump and his administration are. They are all those things, there's no question, and how much they have denigrated us. But we also need to have a reason to vote for somebody, right? To vote for a party, to vote for a candidate. We have to do the balance of the negative opposition messaging, but also the optimist positive messaging as to what a candidate will do for us.
It's exactly right. And we see it just played out time and time again. In the first time in the history of my political career in 2018, 2 years ago, in the midterm elections, we worked on 45 different congressional races for Ben Ray Lujan and the DCCC. We were honored. We won 32 of those. In the focus groups we did in those races with Latino specific, with Latino drop off voters who normally don't vote in an off year election, we learned a whole lot. But the first thing I learned is that they hated Donald Trump. And they hated him so much when we did the test of mail. And for you at home, we gave them lots of different pieces of mail to look at. What's more inviting? What's not inviting? What do you like? What do you not like? So we know how to send mail out to other Latinos in that same geographic area. You know, if it had the picture of Donald Trump on the dang mail piece, they would throw it away without even reading it. And I was just put off by that. That the hatred had got to such a level that they wouldn't even look at the content of who the Democrat, to your point, was, who was even running. So we had to use nuanced messaging of like "Make America Great Again" hat or a Trump Tower or something that didn't literally have his face on it, or they wouldn't even read the mail piece. But the key to that is capturing that hate, but also saying, what are you going to do for me? Like that's what Bernie Sanders, that's some of our secret sauce, other than having lots of Latino staff and having Latino consultants, was being able to pivot. And you teach your campaign to pivot. In that 30-second ad, it should be 15 minutes to remind people that Donald Trump is demagoguing our community. But the next 15 has to be what you're going to do now to make their life better and to make sure that they have a great voice. Felix, back to this issue piece, something that shocked me this year. Healthcare was still number one, economics was still number two. But this rigged system thing, Latinos are really starting to get that, and that's becoming a bigger issue. They feel like they're growing up in a society where white people, elite people, folks who were, those people, we used to call them Wall Street people, but they really feel like the 1%, as Bernie Sanders would say, are folks who have an advantage over them because of economics, and they really, really get that. And if you bring in people who come here from Venezuela or South American countries who understand how corrupt governments can be, the word corrupt and Donald Trump was a big thing in the primary for us to say the system is corrupt. And that was something new this cycle.